Hi, my name is Richard Petticoke and welcome to ReshapeMedia.com. Before getting started, I suggest that you read our Getting Started guide located at ReshapeMedia.com FTML Downloads Getting Started Guide. There is a link on the main site, but this will cover the basics required for running flashtext. So let's go to our HTML file. The basics that we require is our XML namespaces. Now, we have a minified version on the Getting Started guide, so you can actually just use that, so it'll be one line rather than these four. But if I space out the namespaces, you'll notice that I separated each package. So these are the basic requirements. Let's reset those back. You optionally can add a style sheet. This is depending on basically the size of the iframe which you require, and the iframe is the other requirement. The iframe basically runs the FTML engine. Now you can put any positioning or size to the iframe. We use the CSS to do this. And the last requirement is the actual FTML code. This code must be the first element in your body tag of your HTML. As long as you follow these guidelines, you're ready to go and build Flash. So let's get started. Let's explore some of the general properties which all FTML elements share. The most important of these properties, although it is not visual, is the name property. We've assigned this as my object for the example, but you can give it any arbitrary name that you wish. The name is very important, as when scripting you'll be referencing each object by its actual name. So let's skip to a visual property and, for instance, use positioning. Now, FTML supports direct styling on the actual element in the HTML page. You do not require any CSS or JavaScript to style an element. So let's assume we wanted to move this square to the right 100 pixels. So we've assigned an X value to it. We saved our page and let's see how that renders. Okay, great. Our square is actually shifted to the right 100 pixels. So let's go back to our code, and for argument's sake, we actually wanted to shift the square down rather than to the right. So let's give it a Y value of 100, and let's save our page and see how that renders. Okay, great. So our square is actually shifted down 100 pixels. So let's go back to our code. Now, let's assume that we wanted to actually change the size of the object. So let's give it a width of 200 pixels, save our page. Okay, great. The square has actually become 200 pixels wide. Now, FTML does support percentages in the width and the height value. Now, the percentage will be based on the parent element. For instance, the parent of this square is the content, and the content is 100% on its width and height, which is basically filling the screen. So what this should do is this should actually span the square the width of the screen. So let's go and let's save that, and let's refresh our page. Okay, great. So we notice that the square is actually spanned 100% of the width. So let's go back to our code. Now, let's assume that it's not the width, it's actually the height that we wanted to change. Let's give that arbitrary value, save the page, refresh. Great, there we go. Our square is actually now 300 pixels high. So let's go back to the code. Now, FTML also supports centering on each axis, the X and Y axis. This is basically the vertical and the horizontal. So if we position our square at its center X, this will basically center it at 0 on its horizontal axis. So let's save the page. Let's refresh our HTML page. Okay, so we notice that our square is now actually on the horizontal in the center. So let's go back and let's actually assume we wanted to make that on its vertical center rather than its horizontal. So let's add center Y, save the page, and refresh. Okay, perfect. So our square is actually now on the vertical axis in the center. Now we do also support offsetting. For instance, it doesn't have to be at the 0 position. So let's go back to the code and let's assume that we wanted to offset the square on its center, -50, and its center X and its center Y at 10. So let's go ahead and save the page. Let's refresh and see where that goes. Okay, so our square is actually off center a bit. Now if we go back to the code and we can actually just pump that value a bit more to see. Let's go back and let's save that and see where our square goes. So now we can see our square is really off center. Okay, so let's go back to the code. FTML also supports basically filling objects, so we can actually assign an object to its right and to its bottom. So let's go and let's assign a 0 on the right. The right and bottom will both actually accept offsets as well, but for argument's sake, let's just save this and refresh the page and let's see where the square renders. Okay, perfect. So the square is actually on the right of our page. So let's go back to the code. FTML does also support bottom, so let's basically put the square at the bottom. Save our page, refresh. Okay, great. So we notice that our square is actually at the bottom of our screen. So let's go back to the code now. Now, because FTML is Flash, it also supports all Flash properties. For instance, visible. We save this and we actually won't see anything on the screen because it's not visible. There we go. If we go back to the code, let's actually change the alpha. Okay, perfect. So our square is actually lighter. We also support href and href targets, which will basically provide the element as a link and the type of link which you'd like. You'll notice now the square is actually a rollover object. So if we click this, it'll open up a new page which will be blank. So we can also add a tooltip to the element as long as there is a rollover on the element, such as a HTML link. Let's go ahead and refresh the page. And you'll see now that we have a tooltip applied to the element. So these are all the general properties which all FTML elements share.